Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fictional. Oh, I didn't mean to sound like a game show host, but I turned. Welcome to Fictional Foundations, the panel about research. I am Maureen Johnson. I will be your moderator for today. The author of many YA books, some of which are behind me, including the Truly Devious series and the new Hello, Cruel Heart, the tie-in inspired by the Disney film Cruella. And I am with a panel of amazing authors who are going to tell you about their books and their research methods and the gritty about file keeping, notes, data, and being nerdy and using it to make stories. If I could ask all of our amazing panelists to introduce themselves and their books, I'll just say your name and then you can introduce yourself. And we'll start on the order of people I see on my screen. If we could start with Joan.
Hi, my name is Joan He. I'm the author of science fiction and fantasy books for young adults. My debut is Descendant of the Crane, and my upcoming novel is sci-fi called The Ones We're Meant to Find, which is about two sisters who are trying to find each other across the sea.
Great. And Angeline.
Hi, I'm Angeline Boulley, and I'm the debut author of Firekeeper's Daughter. And I pitched my book as Indigenous Nancy Drew or Indigenous Veronica Mars, whatever generation that hits. And I'm just so happy to be here.
And Graci.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Graci Kim. I'm the author of The Last Fallen Star, which comes out with Rick Rider Presents Disney Hyperion next week. Not freaking out or anything like that. The book is about Korean American witches in Los Angeles. It's about families, it's about secrets, it's about the search for magic, and one particular girl who's desperate to belong. And it's inspired by Korean mythology.
And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Tirzah Price, and I'm the author of Pride and Premeditation. It is a murder mystery retelling of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, set in an ahistorical Regency, London, and it's been out for about a month now.
So, those are our amazing panelists. Now we are going to get to the question of research. What role does it play? How much do you do? When have you done too much and you're now just procrastinating? These are the questions we will answer. And this question is for whoever would like to answer first. It's kind of a general broad question across the board here is what came first for you? Was it an idea that you had and then you had to research a whole bunch of it? Or was it something you kind of found while reading something else and then which kind of came first, the chicken or the egg? And I know there's always like more egg afterwards. Egg is research. You know what I mean. But which came first? Like what started you down your path? Anybody can answer.
I can start. So personally, the word research scares me a bit because when I think of research, I think of like hunting for primary texts, reading like a bunch of nonfiction, interviewing people, stalking archives, etc. Which isn't to say I don't do any of that. Like I did end up reading a lot of primary texts for my debut, Descendant of the Crane. But I think the key word there is while. I guess for me, I happen to be taking, like I grew up watching a ton of C dramas. And then in college, I was a Chinese language and cultures minor. And so it was just something that I was doing alongside the writing. And so instead of research, I kind of think of what I think personally, like I contain some research already, like it's my lived in experience. So when I'm thinking of a book, I don't necessarily think of it as inspiration from research. It's more like what fascinates me is probably shaped by what I have already learned. And so I would say the idea probably comes first without me thinking specifically like, oh, this inspired that. And then as I'm then writing the book, I kind of do more research on a need to know basis. I also am allowed to get away with that because I don't write historical fiction or hard sci-fi or anything that I feel like would require me to educate, and that's also not my personal goal as a writer.
And just based on, I'm going to add a little part to the question based on something Joan just said, which is, I think, a great point, is what is research? Because research is a big word. I have an MFA in nonfiction writing, and we did a semester called, it's like research methods and something, something, something. It sounds technical. And research, I apologize for the motorcycle rally going on. I live in New York City. These things happen. But research is a broad term that includes a lot of stuff. It includes motorcycles, more motorcycles, going to the library, primary text, secondary text, stuff you found. So as we get into talking about what research is, just remember that research means a lot of things. So with that, I'll just, anyone else that wants to step in next.
Mine started with a question. A friend went to a different high school, told me about a new guy. He ended up not being my type after all. But at the end of the school year, there was a huge drug bust. And it turned out that the new guy was an undercover officer. And, so my question was, what if we had met? What if we liked each other? And then this spark stayed with me for 20 years before I actually started writing. And it was, what if it wasn't that this new guy liked me, but that he needed my help? And so really for me, research is about answering these questions. Well, why would? And then working backwards and building this mystery that then, of course, this Ojibwe girl is the only one who could, solve this mystery. So for me, it all starts with a question and curiosity of what conditions would make this happen, and what would she need to know? What would she be armed with? What kind of failures would she likely encounter? How would it change her as a person and how she interacts with everyone around her? So that it's all about a question for me.
The perimeters of the research.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't so much as research. I think every book is different, but for The Last Fallen Star, I remember reading Zoraida Cordova's book, Labyrinth Lost, about Latinx witches in the US in modern day society. And I remember feeling really blown away, physically blown away by the concept itself that there could be Latinx witches, because I've always been fascinated by witches. I just think they're just an incredible source of magic in general, but I just thought, wow, there can be witches of other cultural backgrounds. It was like this curtain opened in front of me, and I was like, could there be Korean ones? And it just, that spark, that inspiration that came from reading Zoraida's book opened up a whole world. And suddenly, it's kind of like Joan said before, there was all this, I guess, already stored information inside me that didn't really know where to go, that suddenly became relevant. And I started remembering all these stories and folklores and myths that my parents and my halmoni, my grandmother, told us when we were little. And suddenly I could piece these all together. I was like, I can create a story about Korean American witches based in today's society, but inspired by the things that came from my people. And it's funny because when we talk research, like Joan, I kind of think about research as the sacred thing where you have to do it right. There's a right way, there's a respectful way of doing it. And when I first started exploring this idea, I remember thinking, maybe I'm not the right person to tell the story because I didn't grow up in Korea. Maybe I'm not close enough to these stories for me to tell them. And then I realized that there are 7 million Korean diaspora people living outside of Korea, and that would make us a country or a population in our own right. I mean, the New Zealand population is less than that. So for me, I was like, well, actually the Korean diaspora take on our mythologies and our folklores are its own species of storytelling, and that gave me the confidence that research could be, like Maureen said, a different kind of beast, like talking to my parents or interviewing all my aunties and uncles about their versions of the same stories, because there's so many different versions of each story, and then watching a lot of K-dramas, and then relying on my own creativity too, right, of the things that I've grown up with, from a non-Korean background as well. So yeah, research, I think it's a very, very broad and interesting well of knowledge.
It's stretchy, and it can be. It's what research is what you need it to be. So now we're going to get to the realm of historical research.
Yeah, so when I set out to write this, it was definitely like the idea that came first, which was, how fun would it be to write a genre bending of a classic and we'll make it a murder mystery? And so the first thing I did, of course, was reread Pride and Prejudice for, like, you know, the fifth or sixth time. And I was like, this is great research. I'm like highlighting things and I'm underlining things. And then I very quickly realized that, like, I'm gonna have to do more research. And for me, it was a little bit of like a oh no moment. Like, can I actually do this? Because like historical fiction, you kind of feel like there's this pressure to like get it all right. But what really happened for me when writing historical fiction was my understanding of historical fiction expanded, and I realized that, like, historical fiction does not necessarily mean 100% accuracy in all things. Like, that would be very tedious, and I think it sometimes is very tedious for the reader. So there are amazing authors who are doing, you know, ahistorical and bending historical fact to just write awesome stories. And so I was like, oh, I'll make it ahistorical. That means I'll have to do like less research. But no, that was not the case. So I definitely still did just a ton of different research across a ton of different medias. In some ways, it felt like you really had to know the history really well, so that when you deviated, you were doing so intentionally, not just kind of like willy-nilly running off in a zigzag without any sense of what direction you're going in.
This is another kind of grad school tidbit that they always, I don't know where they came up with this number, but they said you're going to do about 4 times more research than you need. If you were doing interviews for a book or whatever, you're going to have giant file cabinets and you're only going to use a little bit of it. And if you use too much, I'll say there's a book that came out about 25 years ago. It was a mystery and it was historical. And one of the characters, I believe this writer used everything he had ever learned. And it was, his characters would be like, and on the left stood this building, which was built in this year, and you could buy this, and then it would, and then next to that was this building. And it was like 15 pages of like, all right, yeah, okay, I get it. Like, this is too much. So the art of research is also, while it's a broad topic, it's also the art of figuring out what to use. To that end, and I know I don't mean to put pressure on you, it's just I know you have something exciting. Angeline has slides. And I feel like, no, but just having seen them, I feel like we're going to get a sense of how you winnow your, like, how a writer uses their information, and then we can all kind of go off of that. But I really want to show everyone these slides. I think the slides are going to appear in a moment. There they are.
Okay. So, you know, I looked at all the different types of sources that I used when I did my book. It took me 10 years to write my book. And, you know, you usually think of like, oh, I read books to research the story that I wanted to write. But it goes really deeper than that. You know, networking and interviewing subject matter experts, even researching the food and drink that was popular the year that your story was set in. And, you know, just there's so many great sources. And then I'm a fan of using government reports. So the next slide might get into that. So I looked at Department of Justice reports. Most states have 2 U.S. attorneys. They do a year in review. And I was able to find information about different cases that actually happened that informed my research. So I would find this, and then I would go into local newspapers to dive deeper into the cases. because I wanted to make sure that any crime that took place in my book, if someone said, oh, that would never happen, I wanted to be able to say, oh, actually it did happen, and here's where it happened, and this is what, Next slide. Interviewing subject matter experts. So my friend Walt Lamar, he was a friend of a friend, and he's a retired FBI agent who's Native. And, he answered any question that I put to him, he would answer it. And then he led me to other like IRS agents and DEA agents and different. So really it's like that domino effect of you get a great source. And once they know that you are serious about wanting to tell a great story that's credible, doors will open. And next slide. I learned how to make meth from the state police, and people are always really surprised by that. But through a contact that I had, I was able to be the only non-law enforcement person at a day-long workshop, learning how to make meth and how to identify clandestine methamphetamine labs. And you can see like the meth suitcase, the meth trunk, and different paraphernalia. And then the next slide. So I'm hoping that book 2 is easier to keep my research in one spot, because I'm still finding little slips of paper of things that I wanted to put in book 1 that like I wrote on a napkin or something. And so I'm determined to build a better mousetrap this time around for book 2. So I have to see things visually. So I organized how I'm going to keep my notes. And then the next slide, how to name my files, because it doesn't help to have all this information if you can't retrieve it when you need to. And so I just was sharing as an example how I name a file, so that I understand exactly oh, this is the interview I did with Shannon Martin, and I interviewed her on February 14th. And so once you have a system, I'm hoping that makes my life a lot easier for book 1, because I don't have 10 years to do book 2 like I did for book 1. And I think that's it for me.
That's the sublime version. But I mean, it shows a lot of things, including a kind of motorcycle rally. There's a lot of them. Okay, guys. All right. Thank you. Good timing. Thanks a lot, everybody. 10-4. Real talk with that. I wanted to show you, for example, for the Truly Devious series, there's a girl solving a cold case in the 1930s. So I'm a map obsessive. That's me. All my books, I find that maps are a springboard for me. I need to see everything on a map. Even if I have to. So what I did in that case was I purchased off eBay a vintage 1930s highway map of Vermont. Didn't cost much. It was probably about $6 or $7. But I had to make sure, because I'm me, that all of the roads I was talking about were absolutely, I'm holding it the wrong way, but were absolutely accurate. I also bought off eBay a bunch of old 1930s postcards. But research is, because it sounds like something you have to do for school, or it's just like Wikipedia, but it's actually objects, it's conversations, it's photographs, it's maps. Do you guys have any kind of unusual bits or favorite things that fall under the, because here's the nice thing, real talk, you can make anything count as research, which means that sometimes you can slide into the I'm just researching phase. So do you have any kind of favorite research activities?
I mean, I counted Bridgerton. Watching Bridgerton is I'm researching. This is totally. And I think that, when you're writing historical fiction, consuming media that's like set in the time period that you're in, whether it's TV shows or movies or reading other historical books, like maybe it's not necessarily like the note-taking research that's going to like directly inform your writing, but it does help you get in that mindset. And I have found myself inspired many times by just consuming that kind of media, because it gets you thinking about that time period and about how people acted and how they thought and what their mindsets were. So that's kind of like a nice, fun sort of, are you actually working or are you procrastinating type of research?
It's research. It sounded like.
So for me, I found there's quite a lot of stories out there, Korean folklore and mythology that's written in Korean that's available online. And I mean, I can read Korean, but it's very, very slow. And so basically what I did one day is I got my mum on a day when she was free, and I made her sit there with me with my laptop open. And I just said, can you please read it all out to me? Because I find listening so much easier than reading. Can you just read it out? And so she complied. And then we basically had this incredible conversation where she would read stories and she'd be like, well, that's not how I know it. And so then she would go off on her own tangent and tell me about how it was where she grew up. And then my dad would come along and he would say, well, that's not how we tell that story in my fishing village. And so suddenly I had this, and I think actually my uncle was over that day as well. So he also joined and he gave his side of his story. And it became this really, it was a lovely research process, but it was actually a really nice bonding moment. And I'd realized we hadn't really had an opportunity to talk like that about folklore and mythology and oral traditions, because often they were orally passed down, and they would all complain about these youngins writing things incorrectly on the internet and not citing things properly. And so, yeah, that kind of research as well.
It's research. That's the cheer of this, is that it's research. Making math. It's research. Do not take that lesson from this panel. Joan, were there any?
Yeah, kind of like what was mentioned, like for me, it was watching like a live C-drama for my debut, as well as like the actual like academic, more nitty-gritty research, and also for my upcoming sci-fi. It's very inspired by like anime, and like the vibes that you get from that. So watching anime was procrastination and research. I also think, like, in hindsight, even though I wasn't doing research at the time, everything that I learned in school, going even as far back as high school, would count as research, especially for the sci-fi, because a question I get asked sometimes is like, what science research did you do? And the answer is I tried to just use as much as whatever I retained from like high school physics, biochemistry, as much as possible. And then obviously like there'd be some facts, and some things I need to double check in the writing of it. But I think in terms of like the bones, it kind of helped that I was using things that kind of stuck with me, because I feel like it also made the story more accessible. And that's also something that I personally really like from watching like these TV shows of historical texts, is that it takes something and it views it through a lens that is more modern and more, I guess, engaging and relatable to how people, like, to people today, right? And like putting my own twist on that is something that helps me kind of cut down the research a bit more. I think that's what everything I've been saying is just trying to like make research less intimidating for myself and getting through it that way.
I think one thing that probably we've all experienced is that feeling of, when do I know enough? Because writers will doubt themselves on every turn. And when I was starting out and I wanted to write things that had any kind of historical or research bent, I was like, well, I will never know enough. It will take me 25 years to get the background so that I know every angle of this from every historical, social, scientific, mathematics, and there's not even any math in this. Like, until I understand the process of making paper, I will not. You will drive yourself down a little bit. So there's the impulse to kind of keep going out of nervousness, and also because it can be fun, because research can involve going to museums, hanging out with people, talking, having dinner with them, looking at cool stuff, watching movies, rereading books. Basically, if you name it, you can figure out, like, almost anything can be researched under the right conditions. When do you find that you've absorbed enough? Like, was there a point where you're like, I got this. I feel like I can do this now. It's a tough one, I know, because it's subtle.
I would say for me, it was when I understood, I think, where the characters were coming from, and I understood their motivations, and I knew enough about the plot that I was like, okay, I could sit down and start writing this. That said, there were many writing sessions where I would be like in the middle of a scene and realize that like I have to describe either like a setting or like an action or something, and I'd be like, well, crap, I don't know how that actually would look. So then, you know, you think like you're gonna have a productive writing session, and really you spent like an hour Googling and researching, and that can be like discouraging sometimes because it's like I didn't get much done, but you know, you learn a lot too. So yeah, like I think there's part of it where you just like, okay, if I can visualize, I think where I think I need to go, and just keep writing until you hit those roadblocks, because you can always do more reading, do more research. And I know that like I think for me, like my confidence grew the farther I got into the book, and I would have a better sense of like when I needed to pause and when I could kind of like gloss over and come back to it.
Was there anyone else that was like, you've hit the moment where you're like, I got this? Because Angeline, you said you worked on it for about 10 years. I think your mic, you might want to check on your mic.
Yes. For me, it was when I would read some research and it was like there wasn't any new information in it. And then I was like, you know what? I think this, I'm good to go here. And then I really liked what the previous author said about when you dive in deep, then it's kind of like on a specific thing, you can go really deep into it, because you just need that slice of it, and you don't have to know everything about everything on that topic. You just need to know this one thing. For me, it just is always difficult because it's so interesting. I mean, I always find things that are really interesting. So it's hard to stop and get back to writing because all of these things are so cool to learn.
Yeah, you could be hanging out, having dinner with people, talking about stuff you like, or writing.
Yeah.
I don't think I had a specific time where I decided, okay, I'm ready, I'll go into it, because I think for me, so much of my research was about plotting things out. I love planning. I just love having a skeleton and a map and a plan. And I think it's because without it, I just look at the blinking cursor forever and then start to just melt into a puddle of anxiety. So I love getting all my ducks in a row. And I was asked this recently about what kind of tools I use for putting my research and plotting and planning together. And I realized I have like a million. I can't seem to make my mind up. So I start each process with a big, what are two A4s, a A3, right? Yeah, a big A3 sketch pad. And I just get lots of pens in different colors, and I just do a brain dump flowchart with all the ideas that I have and where those could fit into the various parts of the story. It's not linear because I find that at the beginning, with so much research in your head and so many ideas and things, I just can't make sense of the heads or tails. So I just shove everything out onto the paper. And then I try to piece things together with arrows and what have you. And only once I feel like I have a general sense of the story, that's when I start to write. But I find even once I start writing, I'm quite often going back to my A3 or pieces of napkins or the notes app on my phone or voice messages or on Scaffold or Scrivener or on notepads and on the wall sometimes. But yeah, so for me, I really have to force myself to get past the planning mode and then to start genuinely writing?
I'm like the opposite of Gracie, I feel like, where I'm just like a chaotic mess where I do plan like the plot and the story of my book. And once I know like the middle and the ending and like the general character arcs, I kind of just like jump right in. And in terms of like how I even track my research or things like facts that need to be woven in, I honestly like don't have like a system. I don't have like spreadsheets or Scrivener or anything like that. It's kind of like how I approach revision actually, and revision notes, where I try to memorize as much of it as possible, which sounds like scary, but in reality I feel like the story for me, like the story writing, gets more cramped when I have a running list of like facts or things that I want to put into the story. And it's the same for revision. When I get my revision notes, if I have like a physical list of things I need to do, I have a hard time going through the story then and actually making like the changes that work, because I'm like, okay, like I have to do this, this, and this. So instead I try to memorize everything that needs to change, and if it sticks in my memory, that means I've really internalized it. And so any changes that come around from that are more organic and more holistic for the whole story. And it's the same thing for research. I try to remember everything that I can, and what I don't remember, I oftentimes find that it doesn't actually need to be in the book, and that's kind of how I parse down. And also how I feel like I'm ready to jump into the story, which is often, again, too early, but I like to research along the way too.
The stickiness I find really interesting. I've said before, I'm really into maps. And I did this book called The Name of the Star that has the murders of Jack the Ripper as a kind of a backdrop. So I went and I learned where all of the murder locations were, and in 1888, and then I wasn't satisfied until I could walk them without guidance. Totally unnecessary. Could have done the book without it, but for some reason, that's like, for me, I was like, I need to walk this path and be able to be like a tour guide, and just so I could walk through it in my head, but I don't know why. But this leads to a really good audience question, which is a common question, but a good one, which is, they always say that a writer's search history could make them look like a serial killer. What's the strangest thing you've ever researched for any story or novel? I have mine sitting next to me, just off to the side. If you guys want to think, I can show. I'll just reach over. It's a file called CO2 Research, and it's just printouts from the Journal for Forensics and Science with titles like "A Fatal Case of CO2 Intoxication in a Fermentation Tank." Lots of things like that. Pictures of bodies. Fatality in a wine vat, with lots of pictures. So, I mean, that's pretty direct, like, that's some serial killer stuff. But does anyone, and you have, and the way I said it is like a housekeeping thing, and you have your math, like you're having.
Well, I also write murder mysteries, so I have had some interesting, just searches about, mostly my second book is about poisoning, so I was doing a lot of poison research, and it was getting a little bit discouraging, just like the thought of somebody stumbling upon my search history. So I did kind of at one point sort of switch over to some books that were like about historical poisoning, like this one has been very helpful, The Secret Poisoner. And so that was like a little bit more reassuring, because I was like, well, that's just a book I bought, as opposed to like just tons and tons of Google searches about like very specific things, like what does arsenic poisoning actually look like? Don't Google that. I'm still
I have.
But you have.
Yeah, those of us who write anything that have murder mystery components to it, it's like automatic shadiness that's just kind of built in. But then again, everybody's got something that looks maybe a little, you guys are like, ours doesn't look that bad.
I have one that's like quite bad, so I wasn't sure if I was gonna say
There's always
it, but
one.
I had to Google how many like calories are in a human body if you eat it. So yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Love a
talking
winner.
about. How many?
Do we want to know?
So I don't actually remember the exact number, but I know that it could sustain you for like a couple weeks if you're just. But yeah.
Is that with or without bones? This is the kind of thing, right? Where you have to be like,
Maureen.
sorry.
I googled it with. It was just like no bones, no bones.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'm a vegetarian.
I
I
wish
don't
I
know.
had
Maybe
some-
do people chew on bones? I don't know.
I wish I had some juicy story, but you know, my stories are middle grade. So middle grade, kidlit, very wholesome. Although I have to say, I did research quite a lot on different torture tactics.
There it is.
Yeah, I don't really know if anyone reads the book how it is relevant to the book, but I did, yeah, it did form part of the research.
There it is.
Mm. Mm.
In one early draft of my book, I wanted to see if a character could be thrown into a car and land a certain way on the front seat. And so my son was at hockey practice. I was waiting in the car. I was like, you know what? This is as good a time as any. So I got out, went around to the passenger side, and like jumped into the car and landed, and then just tried to figure out like, okay, this is where my eyes would be, this is where this would go, this is, and then the tribal police pulled up and they were like, is everything okay? And it was like, I'm doing book research. And
research.
yeah, my feet were hanging out of the car and my arms were, and so yeah.
Acting out scenes. It's
Yep.
also research. I have participated in various fight. You're doing the move where you're like, I don't know if anyone's done the kind of like, how would that go if he stabbed him and then his head fell off, or stuff like that. We have so little time left. I'm gonna grab one. Okay, there's so many good questions. They are pouring in. Oh, okay. I have to choose one. Okay. What's your favorite thing you learned or fact? And by the way, I just want to say, everybody, thank you for submitting these questions. They are so good. As I've been chalking, like the page has just been like. What is your favorite thing that you learned or factoid that couldn't make its way into your book, or that had to be taken back out of in editing?
I feel like I always go first, but here. So this is not necessarily like a little factoid, but one really cool thing about research that I did was there is an amazing website called Old Bailey Online. It is like all of the criminal proceedings of London Central Court from like the late 1680s to the early 1900s. And it is really fascinating because you can like filter through by court cases and different charges, and then you can actually read transcripts. So I did so much reading of all of these different court cases and transcripts, and there's a lot of little tidbits that I was writing down, and I wanted to include them all in the book, but just couldn't.
Okay, I have one. I found out that traditionally in Korean culture, when people pass away, they get their bodies get tied in 7 different ways with the special string and different layers of cloth and stuff like that. 7 specifically because when they pass, they go through 7 different trials over 49 days. And every week for the 49 days, the families pray, and they have this altar, and they have like a whole kind of symbolic process to help the person who's passed go through the 7 different trials. So there's these different trials that they have to go through in order to make it through to the other side. And so you prepare things like shoes and food like rice so that they can make the journey without being hungry. And but it's very specifically 7 days, 7 days each, and 7 different trials, so 49 days. It's a very symbolic time period, and I just love that. I wasn't able to put it in directly, but I have managed to put a very similar type of thing into the second book, so I guess it's not all wasted.
Anyone else have a tidbit that we have time, I believe, for one more question. And this is interesting. How do you handle conflicting information? They say this happens when I'm teaching and when I'm researching and teaching all the time. What happens if you get something that runs into conflict with something else?
If my source is tribal, I go with that. So I'm more likely to trust what an elder tells me, even if it contradicts something that a scholarly research journal might say. I'll listen to my elders.
I think for me, I always try to put the story first. So if something is in conflict, whichever one works best for the story, I'll try to go with that one first. But if it's something where it's neutral, then I'll probably try to dig deeper or just go with what I feel like works best.
I do a similar thing to Joan. I mean, I guess with fantasy, the benefit is that you can make it your own. And so I do what's right for the story also. Yeah.
Yeah, similarly to Joan and Gracie, and I have the benefit too of just being like, it's a historical, so we're just gonna go with what works. But you have to be careful about that too. I always try to consider like the context as well, and why is this specific thing important, and do I need to dig deeper, or can I just kind of make a creative judgment on this?
And because we actually have about 2.5 minutes, and what is coming up a lot is people would like to know generally how you're organizing your information, like I think literally, physically, or not organizing information.
For book 2, I'm using Evernote. So I'll take notes in Microsoft OneNote, but then I organize all of my notes and research in Evernote.
Like I said before, I have a whole mishmash of places where I keep information, but I do find Scapple really interesting for people who are visually minded and who need to see big picture, because you can so easily connect ideas and thoughts with flowcharts and arrows and lines and things. So Scapple's a really useful resource.
Scapple, and there's a similar program called Miro, I think, that has a similar kind of function, which I also love a chart.
I feel like I'm learning a lot from you all, because I have folders on my browser with bookmarks and folders and subfolders. I have running Word documents where I have like copied and pasted certain things and citations that I want to remember. I have a notebook where I just have pages and pages of written notes. I'm a big, I like whenever I can grab a book. I do flags, I underline, I highlight. But you guys are making me feel like I need to elevate my research organization game for the next books.
Handfuls of stuff are fine.
Yep, just sticky notes everywhere.
Same, yeah. I think I definitely do. After listening to this, I'm like, oh gosh, I need to elevate for sure, because I have a bunch of unsaved Word documents, about 1,000 drafts are labeled 1.1, a lot of stickies both on my laptop and like everywhere, and nothing is really organized. Again, I try to keep as much of it as possible in my brain, because then if it crashes, I'm not going to lose it. I also have started using Google Docs more, just because I feel like it's easier to keep track of things there.
And there's nothing
whatever
wrong
works,
with
right?
700
Whatever
tabs
works.
open. Just do it. Just keep your tabs open. Handfuls of stuff. Whatever works for you, it's fine. And probably a mix, like some really neat stuff combined with like a pile of garbage. It's whatever works is what works. Well, we are down to our last minute. I want to thank all of our amazing panelists. I think we have time to you just quickly tell us where we can find you on social media and otherwise.
I'm on Twitter at Fine Angeline, like fine wine, Angeline, and Instagram, Angeline Boulley.
Cool. I'm on Twitter at Graci Kim and on Instagram at Graci Kim Writes.
I'm on Twitter and Instagram as well, both just at Tirzah Price.
I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and recently I'm trying to get onto TikTok, and the handle's the same for all of them. It's at Joan He Writes.
And thank all of you for coming. It looks like we had a really great, we can't see all of you, but I have seen your questions. Looks like we have some amazing people out there tonight. Hopefully you picked up some tips. And remember, meth and it's research. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.